All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking to you today. And there's the fur-elise theme that I use for my program. Excuse me for that little congestion. Still not quite over my cold. Oh, let me get my light on as well. Improve the lighting slightly. There we go. You can see me just a little bit better there. And yeah, I'm actually in a pretty good mood. I'm feeling better than I was earlier this morning because it does actually appear, let me just put this right up for you, that the deal was reached. Yeah, there's apparently a ceasefire is about to be announced. And we'll get into the details as far as I know them. I'm certainly not fully conversant, of course, as probably very, very few people, the negotiators are. But the deal not maybe quite as good as I had hoped. That is good for the victims of the Israeli genocide, but we've got to be very, very relieved in this moment that the Haaretz is at least announcing, and even a half hour, you can see the timeline there, 6:21 p.m. IST. I don't know whether I guess that's Israeli Standard Time. I don't know how long ago. I just checked. I've been consistently going to Haaretz and other sites like the New York Times to see if a deal was reached yet. There actually was some news from, I guess it was also Haaretz, that may be more concerned, less optimistic, that Israel was claiming, and maybe accurately, I don't know, that Hamas was imposing some new conditions, which seems very unlikely because Israel's always claiming, has been claiming for over a year, that the impediment to peace has been unreasonable demands from Hamas, basically unreasonable demands that Israel stop murdering tens of thousands of Palestinians and stop occupying Palestinians, stealing Palestinian land. But at least for now, the news does give me some hope, some optimism. And yesterday after the program, I actually was in about the best mood I've been. I talked about this yesterday. I've been so upset, so devastated. I'm just cautiously optimistic that this deal will in fact hold. And maybe, just maybe, there'll be relief for the victims of the American-Israeli assault on the Palestinian people. So that's what we can only hope for. There's a lot to unpack with regard to this deal, and obviously we'll be talking about it as the days continue, as the days come ahead. And hopefully we'll be talking about a deal. Hopefully this really will happen. If you want to join me, if you have insights, if you have thoughts, comments, please do at any point. You can see the number there on the screen for Halitics, 242-5646, 240-242-5646. Please click like, please click subscribe. Really, really would appreciate that as well. And you note that the deal hasn't been completely finalized according to the Haaretz sub-headline there. And it's really source told the newspaper that only small tech details are delaying the detail. But supposedly there will be a announcement this evening, and it is evening in Israel, or it will be very, very soon. I presume it is because it's the winter, so days are shorter. So presumably that press conference will happen. Before we get into what I understand, and obviously my information is limited to what's in the newspaper, specifically Haaretz has been the most detail, has been the source with the most details, but I've also looked at the New York Times as well. Washington Post pretty useless, to be honest with you. At least I haven't found anything much in there that's been helpful to me. But before we get into that, just again, we're going to center the victims, and let's just hope that for now these are the last. And there'll be more, tomorrow as Israel has continued, I'm sure, its onslaught, but with American weaponry. But hopefully the numbers of reported dead in Gaza will start to dwindle very, very significantly. They didn't yesterday, 62 more dead after 61 on Monday, 62 killed Tuesday by Israel in Gaza. And that is amid reports that the truce deal, which I just reported, based on Haaretz is actually reached, or is, all but reached. So even with these talks in very, very serious condition, in other words, that they were close, Israel continued to kill. And what some have said, and I believe this may be true, I think it was Glenn Greenwald, indicating that because they were close, because Israel knew, the Israeli military, because Bibi knew, Smotrich knew, Gallant, I guess Gallant is out, but because Ben-Gvir knew, the Israeli hardliners in the military knew that a deal was close, they decided, hey, let's not miss an opportunity to kill more Gazans. Let's not miss an opportunity to wreak even more havoc, cause more mayhem, inflict more suffering. So that's who we're dealing with. That's who our ally is. That's what they do. But again, I don't want to be too negative, because this is really, really good news. The best we've heard. It's good news only because of how bad things have been. Yesterday during the program, when I started off after reporting on the death count, the latest numbers, and let me just give you that for today as well. You have a 62 killed yesterday. I mentioned over 46,000, nearly 47,000 now identified Gazans killed. And even the New York Times reporting that the true number of dead could well be 40% higher. It's actually probably a couple 100% higher. At least that's what Doctors Without Borders and other experts on the ground have indicated, The Guardian, The Lancet. Regardless, the number is horrifying, heartbreaking, horrific. The report from yesterday that I gave you was that the deal looked pretty good as you could expect for Gaza. And there were several reasons that I had come to that conclusion. One, Haaretz reporting that this was exactly the same deal that had been on Bibi's desk for 8 months, and he just consistently rejected it. So it was something. It was terms that Hamas believed even 8 months ago were acceptable to it and to the Palestinian people. And for 8 months, Bibi said no. And only aggressive pressure by Steve Witkoff, Trump's handpicked negotiator, who read the riot act to Bibi, this was what we reported yesterday, did he finally agree. So that suggested these were terms that actually were relatively favorable to the Palestinians. Also, the hardliners, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, made clear they didn't like the terms. The Israeli right-wing talk show hosts were very upset. They said Trump had betrayed them, had lied to them. So all of that was good, right? All of that indicated that maybe, just maybe, the Palestinians were getting a fair deal. Haaretz is reporting differently, and what they're reporting is a little more, at least, and they have different analysis. Different analysts. So yesterday's analysts concluded that the deal was actually favorable, or relatively favorable, certainly worth, certainly positive net for Palestine. Today's analyst comes to a different view and is much more pessimistic from my perspective. Now, Haaretz is an Israel newspaper, and they're not real, to be honest with you, they're a little less racist, they're a little less Islamophobic, and they seem to hate Palestinians less than the rest of the Israeli media, but they're hardly allies of this beset group, this beset minority. Here's what Jack Curry there reports. Hamas is forced to accept terms. Remember, yesterday we were saying, based on what Haaretz and others were saying, that it was the Israelis that believe, that perceive themselves as being forced. Now it is the Palestinians, Hamas, that is being forced, according to Haaretz. So that suggests that the terms aren't as great as we might have hoped. And we'll get into some of the details in a moment. But what really struck me and what I put in that caption there is that the war isn't over, right? It's going to be a ceasefire announced, but Israel isn't going to demobilize. It's not going to pull its troops out of Gaza, at least not yet. The hostages will be freed, but the war technically won't be over. And again, it's not a war, it's a turkey shoot. It's a whale hunt, right? The Palestinian people have no real ability to resist. So how is this deal not? How do the terms, at least as we understand them, and obviously there's going to be a lot more details coming out, and we just hope it does take, if for no other reason, because the bombing is so, what are you going to say? People are just being bombarded, destroyed. They're living in, tent cities. They have no resources there's virtually none. People starving, Israel using starvation as a weapon. So presumably that really will end. But what didn't end, as I indicated earlier, is the war itself. There won't be a total end, and there won't be a total Israeli withdrawal at the time of signing, which is what Hamas had been, of course, demanding. But they're just not in a position. They can't. You have no power. It does remind me of the Malayan dialogue when the Athenians went to Milos. This is from Thucydides. And they said, either we enslave your children and women and we kill your men, or you join us in the war against Sparta. That's what they told Milos. You're our ally, in quotation marks, and our allies have to fight alongside of us and have to deploy men in the war. And the Malayans were like, we don't have any stake in this. We don't want to fight. And Sparta said, we're not going to have any dialogue with you. This is the Malayan dialogue. We're not going to have a discussion except your choice. Either you give in and you send your troops alongside ours, or we sack your city and we kill your men and we enslave your women. We're not having a discussion. We're not negotiating. There are no negotiations. You have one day to accept or reject. And that's basically what's going on here. There's no negotiations. It's a lion against a goat tied to a stake. And either the goat accepts that the lion won't kill it right then, and will stop, or it will. And at this point, I guess the Hamas said, well, we just can't let our goat, our last goats be all killed by this lion. And in the Malayan dialogue, the Malayans decided they were not going to give in to Athens, and they did pull up the ladders, and they did bar their gates, and Athens laid siege to Milos and ultimately carried out its threat. So, when you go up against a power that's got weapons and is utterly ruthless and merciless, then you sometimes will make a deal that in the end you're not thrilled about, of course. So what else? The biggest thing is, that war's not technically over. That's the worst. And Israel obviously is not withdrawing. Now, you wonder what Witkoff is saying. My hope is that there's a recognition now in Israel that they're not being given a green light, that they can't do whatever they want, that they have a president who, at least to a degree, is going to say, you're our client state, you're our proxy in the Middle East, you're our aircraft carrier. but we are the ones who drive that, who control the aircraft carrier. We decide what direction it goes. And if that is the attitude, then Israel will not have its way completely. That's all we can hope. What else did Hamas give up? Some of their well-known Palestinian prisoners. Most of the Palestinian prisoners will be released, fortunately, but some will not. I don't know how big a deal that is. That doesn't strike me as the most. I wish they'd all be released, but I don't think should be a deal breaker. As far as I can tell, those prisoners presumably were some of those who planned October 7, and obviously there's tremendous anger and hatred towards them. In Israel, I can understand why they did it. I get the feeling of hatred towards Israel that animates Palestine, but still, they killed a lot of innocent people, and I'm not going to say that this is some horrible outrage if they're not released right away. What Hamas, though, does say is that there will the issues that they're concerned about specifically, most particularly the withdrawal, will continue to be pushed, and that the negotiators, the representatives, have received guarantees from the mediators that negotiations on actual physical withdrawal by the Israeli military will, discussion, those negotiations will continue. So that is hopefully sounds good. Again, I think the only thing that really will make it real, the only way to make real Israeli withdrawal is if the Trump administration pushes them. If the Trump administration refuses to accept any excuses and BS like we've seen for so long from Israel. By the way, again, just so you see it, you've seen it, but do click like, there's your like button, bump, like, and then I also do hope you'll click subscribe if you haven't done so. The Haaretz magazine, newspaper, really, not magazine, it comes out every day, and I believe, at least it used to be, I don't know if they put it on that newsprint newspaper. The print is the print, but I don't know if they put it on newspaper or not. But the Gazans just said, hey, we just have to stop the Hamas said we have to stop the humanitarian catastrophe, obviously, which is worsening by the day. We've got to get those trucks in there, and, hopefully we'll live to fight another day. 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. Hey, Ari, good to see you in the chat, as always. And the other issues that drove Hamas to accept the deal, according to the latest in Haaretz by Jack Curry, a deal that is not as good as at first blush I believed it was. And as I discussed yesterday, also that Hamas is more isolated. Their allies are largely gone. Hezbollah has been destroyed. Iran is deeply, mired in its own problems. Syria defeated completely. Assad kaput, puffed. So really, Hamas had few or no real allies left. Houthis, yes, but the Houthis are not particularly powerful, and they're geographically isolated as well in the southeast corner of the Red Sea. Pretty far from Gaza. All right, 240-242-5646. So but the big reason, according to Haaretz, is Trump's threats against Hamas, against Palestine, saying there will be hell to pay if they don't, or he'll unleash hell, right, in Gaza if the hostages aren't released. So that also causing Hamas to accept this deal. Now, I want to make a few points about that. I think that's awful that Trump said that. I think the threats against Palestine are so wrong. After Palestine has suffered so much, the only threat should be against Israel. And this is not in any way an excuse. But what I will say that Trump did do is he applied real pressure. He, as far as we can tell, right? He put pressure on Israel. For the first time, real, meaningful pressure on Israel, on Bibi. And that, coupled with, presumably, threats against Hamas and Palestine, caused both sides to make concessions. Now, I think you didn't need to get Hamas to make concessions. I think what you do is you say to Israel, we're not giving you another penny, right? We're not giving you another penny for war. We're not giving you anything else. That's it. It's over. If anyone's going to be the victim of an unleashed hell, it will be Israel. You know, I think you could say that. But to give Trump some credit, yes, he pushed both sides. Yes, he rolled up his sleeves. Yes, he was willing to, make statements, apparently. Now, there's a lot to be very, very harshly critical of Trump. One of the and the Republicans in general. As I understand, and I don't have the story up because I'm more focused on this and will continue to follow it, will continue to track it. The most important deal for me is that there be a ceasefire first and then peace. Second, that can only happen if there's pressure from the United States on Israel. That's the only way. It looks like there was some pressure exerted by Trump, and that did lead to this relatively good news. This is an incredible indictment of the Biden-Harris administration. This, to me, reflects what a complete failure their foreign policy has been, certainly with respect to the Middle East. And if we see some kind of deal reached, and I'm hopeful, more hopeful I was more hopeful that there would be a deal reached with Russia to end the killing in Ukraine. If that happens, I think those of you who insisted that the only legitimate vote, the only acceptable vote in the presidential election was for Harris, have been proven wrong. That simply was a false statement. Two existential crises that we faced were exacerbated by, largely caused, in my opinion, by Biden-Harris, and were not addressed, were not solved by Biden-Harris. Trump comes into office, he gets a ceasefire, and as we move forward, if there is a resolution that seems to take, that leaves the Palestinian people without being destroyed, that's how low the bar set by Harris-Biden was. That's how low it was set. This is not a praise. This is not an encomium to Trump. What this is the proof, in my view, that we on the left have to come up with something better, much better than what the Democratic Party has offered us. A party that has pursued policies that are so bad that on occasion and in important ways they can make Trump look good. That's just how awful the Democratic Party has been. All right, 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. 240-242-5646. Just want to get, again, I was critical of the New York Times. I try to be fair. I was critical of the New York Times because I felt, and it's reported yesterday, and I'll show you the headline, that they were being unfair to Trump, that they were, or they probably don't view it as being unfair because the New York Times is Zionist. They made excuses and they provided an apologia for Israel from the beginning. And from long before this horrific, amped up genocide began on October 7, 2023. But, I took the position that when the New York Times presented Trump's contribution to the peace deal as part of his insistence that, unless that a deal be reached, lest he unleash hell, or all hell to be pay. I don't even different quotes. One is unleash hell. According to the New York, that's what Halitics says. According to the New York Times, he said there'll be hell to pay. Probably said both. But the New York Times claiming that was a big driver. And I was, hey, wait a second. That's not really fair to Trump, because what Haaretz is reporting, at least, is that it was, and what the Israeli Hasbara, the propaganda disseminators, have claimed, is that Trump is pushing Israel. But it appears that, Trump's threats to Hamas also brought that organization to its knees. Regardless, even if it's not a great deal for Palestine, even if, and it apparently isn't, even if Israel may start killing again, a ceasefire is to be greatly welcomed. And there's simply no way, I believe, to look at these developments without without a very, very critical look at the Biden-Harris administration. Biden preparing to leave office. So he's going to be giving a speech tonight. According to the New York Times, this will cap his 5-decade political career. Now, it's been a pretty bad 5 decades, if you ask me, right? I mean, Biden carried water for the insurance companies insurance companies, yes, and all, student lenders, credit card companies, all of them. He was a corporatist. He was against busing early on in his career, and I have mixed feelings about busing. I don't want to condemn him for that, but he was not at any point a real advocate for integration. Let's put it that way. He was not a real advocate for civil rights at any point in his career. And when he first began it, he was, that was during segregation, actually, or at least when he was a teenager. Never been a progressive. And you can look at many areas where he failed the American public. Certainly the bankruptcy deal that he championed, which exempted, which made it much harder for Americans to shelter debt, bankruptcy, including credit card debt, exempting credit card lenders from usury laws, deregulating the student loan industry so that now so many Americans will die in debt because of loans they took out 40, 50, 60 years earlier, 70 perhaps years earlier. Sheepdogging Democrats into supporting Clarence Thomas, arguably the worst Supreme Court justice past 150 years. Sheepdogging Democrats into supporting the war on Iraq, which has been a complete and utter disaster. Capstone of his horrific political career, the genocide, Gaza, and endless proxy war with Russia. So a terrible political career. There's simply no way to look at it. And I haven't even touched on a lot of other miserable failures. The 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill, which led to the incarceration of more African Americans during the Clinton administration than under any other president in American history. Joe Biden has been, and this is why I do not support recent presidential Democratic candidates. It's not that they're not good enough. It's that they're bad. Okay, so it's not that, I wish he was for Medicare for all, but at least he's for lowering the age of eligibility for Medicare and taking real steps towards guaranteeing every American health care. But no, he's not, right? I mean, his policies were bad on health care. He helped as best as he possibly could, for example, Medicare disadvantage, privatizing rather health care. It's not as though he pushed Israel to embrace a two-state solution. I think the only viable solution is a one-state solution. He didn't do that. Like you could say, well, a two-state solution probably would be better, wouldn't be ideal, there'd still be war, there'd still be killing, it's not the right solution, it's not the right solution to the problem, but better than what we have now, or not as bad as what we have now. But he didn't embrace a two-state solution. He embraced a one-state, a hegemon, Israel. So that's why that's why I call for an alternative, an emerging party alternative. And I think it's proven by this record, by Biden's record, how bad it is. And the fact that it's, even Trump, as bad as Trump is, it looks like we have strong reason to believe, at least when it comes to a very important issue, Israel, Trump is making progress where Biden, Harris did not. Biden giving a speech tonight, I always think those speeches are a load of crap. I don't really focus on stuff like that. I really don't. I look at solutions. I'm talking about Biden now, his terrible record, not because I want to even kick the man while he's down. The point is we have to understand how Democratic leadership has led us to a terrible place, along with Republican leadership, that they're both the architects, or at least if not the architects, they're the builders who, along with the architects, I guess the corporate elite, have led us to, close to Armageddon. Close to Armageddon. If Trump is taking us a little bit back from the brink with this ceasefire that he's pushing, then you have to say this really proves just how bad the Democrats are, that even Trump, who's awful, let's not make any excuse, let's not try to pretend Trump isn't awful. He just may not be any more awful than Harris Biden. And that, to my way of thinking, is proof positive. We have to go in a different direction. All right, here's Biden. This is the guy that up until July of last year was the Democratic, he was going to be the candidate. Clearly, he's lost it.
Mr. President, do you regret your decision to run for re-election? Do you think that made it easier for your predecessor to now become your successor?
I don't think so. I think I would have beaten Trump, and I think that Kamala could have beaten Trump. It would have beaten Trump.
So it's so bizarre. I would have beaten Trump. Kamala would have beaten Trump. That's what he said. I think it was last week, a few days ago. I'm not really sure. This is getting a lot of attention. The Young Turks widely mocked this. And I want to give a little bit of a shout out. I've never been a fan of the Young Turks, but I appreciate they're going after the woke, liberal, in quotation marks, left recently and calling out its contradictions and how they, have made apologies for the Democrats and how they failed to hold power accountable. I do give them a little bit of credit for that. I have no problem with them going into conservative spaces. We should be trying to build bridges with poor, struggling, and working class people. They've tried to do that. They are trying to do that. I don't think they've given up whatever values they might have. Not that clear to me that they have very many. So, I welcome that change in their policy now, that they're not just demonizing the right. Now, if you're going to go make excuses for people, who are the leaders on the right, then that's a different issue, and I don't believe in that for a minute. You have to call it bad, evil, wherever it is. But we should be talking to each other, and I give TYT credit for at least doing that. I don't want to mock Biden, for saying, well, I would have beaten Trump, I could have beaten Trump. It seemed clear he was not going to beat Trump. The polls had him down much further against Trump than they did Kamala. In fact, Kamala was leading Trump for quite some time. He couldn't have beaten Trump. He was going to lose. Now, and I don't know that he understands that. Maybe he just can't accept. Maybe he just can't state it. If it's that he can't say it because he feels the pressure of, the political advisor class, which is so pernicious. The partisan advisors are so problematic. You can't ever give an inch. You can't ever give credit to the other side. You can't work together. You can never give them a win. That's what the political advisor class provides. That's endless conflict. No effort, no ability to try to reach across the aisle to make life better, to come up with policies that benefit the American people. That's one thing Bernie has done. Bernie has worked with Republicans to get peace deals through, to end supplying weapons to malefactors. So we do need to reach across the aisle whenever possible. There are opportunities. But the political advisor class says, no, you can't ever give any credit. You can never give an inch. So maybe Biden says, I can't admit I would have lost, because that would suggest there's something rotten in the state of the Democratic Party. We have to always take the position. We could have won. Hillary would have won if it wasn't for the Russians, if it wasn't for social media, if it wasn't for Comey, right? It's never our policies are bad. And it may be it's never our candidates are phonies, dishonest, that we need to move in a different direction. We need to become truly populist. We need to become a party of the people, not the corporatists. And Joe Biden can't admit that. So he says, oh yeah, I could have won. And Kamala, quite astonishingly could have won, when obviously she did. I mean, whether she could have or she couldn't, maybe she could have. I think she could have, actually. I agree with that. If she had run a different campaign, if she had run a people-centered campaign, if she had run a working-class, middle-class centered campaign, yeah, I think she could have won. Sure. It wasn't like she was dealt some deck that made it impossible. It wasn't that Biden put her in an untenable position. She was a bad candidate with bad advisors who embraced bad policies. That's why she lost. You lost because you're demented. You would have lost because you're demented.
I thought it was important to unify the party. And when the party was worried about whether or not I was going to be able to move, I thought even though I thought I could win again, I thought it was better to unify the party. And it was the greatest honor in my life to be President of the United States, but I didn't want to be one who caused a party that wasn't unified to lose an election. And that's what.
So he says, we had to be unified. So we unified behind Kamala. And again, this is the kind of rhetoric that, to my way of thinking, proves we need to move in a different direction, that the Democrat Party can no longer be a change agent, that it is a bought and paid for appendage of the billionaire class. And I say that because the party was most certainly not unified. It was not unified behind Biden. It was not unified behind Harris. There were major fissures, most specifically with respect to foreign policy and the opposition by young people, by Palestinians, the opposition to the Israeli genocide supported by the U.S. government. But there were other areas as well. There's a lot of disquiet among the working class population against the war in Ukraine. There was tremendous dissatisfaction among labor. These are traditional Democratic constituents. The Latino population did not embrace Kamala at any point. So the idea that the party was unified is clearly wrong. Unless you view, as Joe Biden obviously does, the party as elected federal Democrats, Congress, because they were united. They all supported her, right? You had AOC and Bernie with those speeches and the billionaires, Pritzker. So the Democratic elites were united. And that's who the Democrats view as the party, not the voters, not rank and file, not workers, not union members, not voters of color, not women. That's not the Democratic Party. Because if it were, then Joe Biden couldn't say the party was unified in support of Harris. They were not. Only Democratic representatives, senators, Jamie Raskin, and Josh Shapiro, they liked Kamala. If that's your idea of unified, I guess this is your party. If your idea of unified is poor, struggling, and working people together demanding peace, economic security, decent jobs, education, healthcare, if that's your idea of a unified party, you got to look elsewhere. All right, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. I do want to talk a little bit about the ongoing tragedy in Los Angeles and just how bad things are, and the wind's picking up. And I haven't, to be perfectly honest with you, followed that as closely as maybe I should be. But I've seen a few stories that really caught my eye, and I wanted to address them. And one, and for those of you who feel I'm too critical of the liberal newspapers, the Washington Post, the New York Times, too quick to see their errors and to report them, sometimes with a certain degree of glee. Now I'm going to point out how a Murdoch paper, a right-wing paper, although I guess it's considered somewhat intellectual, maybe, how the Wall Street Journal presents propaganda, how it tries to fool you and bamboozle you into not accepting what's without question true. So from Wall Street Journal opinion, California's wildfire climate excuse. And again, let me just urge you, if you haven't yet, I always interrupt my program to do this several times. Please do click like, please click subscribe. I need your support. We need this to be a dialogue. This needs to be a back and forth with a conversation where we're working together to come up with solutions to the problems that we face, including the existential threat of the climate holocaust. And it is a holocaust, obviously, a fire, right? I mean, what else is that? But what we're seeing in Los Angeles is a massive fire. Wall Street Journal, it's not climate. It's not, the problem isn't that we're burning too many fossil fuels, because after all, they don't say this, we're, our clients, the Wall Street Journal gets paid by the fossil fuel industry. We get our ads. They do these massive, advertorials all the time. We sit on the same, our reporters and our board sits on the boards of fossil fuel companies. We're extreme right-wingers. So of course we're not going to accept the truth. We're part of a conspiracy to gull you and fool you into believing this isn't perhaps the most terrifying problem humans have ever faced and the greatest that we've ever caused. So that's the Wall Street Journal's position. It's just complete BS. So they're coming out and they're like, oh, watch out for hydroclimate whiplash. The term the climate left is what they say is suddenly using to explain the LA wildfires. And to change the subject from the failure of state and local government. Well, first of all, nobody's changing the subject. There's been a tremendous amount of coverage of the failures of Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass, Mayor Bass, and others on the left. This is not some kind of a distraction or, what's the word? I guess distraction, but it's not trying to avoid recriminations against the Democratic leadership, which has failed largely, which is corporatist, which is, by the way, often embracing policies that the Wall Street Journal likes. But what the Journal claims is it's not what they call whiplash, and I think that term is being used, that you get very wet weather and very dry weather, and that causes a problem. Saying, oh, this is always the case. This is the way it is in California. There's wet and there's dry. I mean, come on. So they simplify a somewhat, but not particularly complex idea. The theory is that climate change caused 2 especially wet winters in California, leading to lush vegetation growth. And now, because of the dry spell, we've got hydroclimate whiplash. They're basically making a mockery of it by this again. So climate change explains wet and dry seasons. Again, oversimplification, dishonest. It's not the burning of fossil fuels causes there to be some rainy seasons and some dry seasons. It's that it's causing extreme aridity. It's causing extreme levels of rainfall. And it's in years that are dry, causing hotter temperatures, greater winds. So it's not, yes, it's rainy today and it's going to be dry tomorrow, so therefore it's the climate crisis. It's a climate hoax. No, it's that it's really, really dry and then it's really, really wet and vice versa. And the paper, the journal, comes up with this kind of BS graph where their argument is, well, again, this is California. We get rain, we get dry. And then they put this chart up there, which for all I know is accurate. And they're trying to say this proves our point. Look at that. It's like sometimes those lines go way, way up when there's a lot of rain. And then other times they're much, much lower. They're a third, right? The wettest winter there was wettest season 43 inches and the driest around 12 or 13. So 1/4 as much rain in the driest season. It's 11 inches back in 23. Now I plotted 23 or 22, right? So as the Times pointed out, it was very, very dry in 22. Or it didn't point that out. What it's saying is it was wet in 23, it wet in 24, now it's very dry. That's what it's saying. They're saying early 24. The rainy season is usually from, say, November through April. But what they don't tell you is that 22 was the second driest year since 1900. And then you had, so in fact, even by their own standards, it was quite a dry year for all of California. And then you did have a lot of precipitation, 23, 24. But this is for all of California. Obviously, California, an enormous state, which includes the highest peak, I believe it's the highest, maybe it's in Colorado, but I think it's Mount Whitney, the highest peak in the lower 48, as well as the lowest elevation in the entire country, that the Mojave Desert, well below sea level. California, a state with a very, very long coastline, with a very flat central region, high mountains. So you can't use California as a climate area, a climatic region. You have to look at various local areas within California and just say, well, is that where we saw the climate whipsaw? But the LA Times, I guess they think you're too stupid to understand that a lot of snow in the Sierras in Lake Tahoe area has nothing to do with LA. That you could have an extremely dry season in Los Angeles while there's still a lot of snow in Northern California. But they just decide they're going to ignore all that and come up with this chart that tells you very, very little. In fact, the evidence is clear. Yes, it was climate whiplash is a significant factor behind the LA fires. And this is from a scientific journal that is, I believe, peer-reviewed, where the articles are peer-reviewed. Nature Reviews, Earth and Environment, Hydroclimate Volatility on a Warming Earth. I think I'm going to take what these scientists say a little more seriously than what the Wall Street Journal tells me about climate. Clearly a biased publication, the Wall Street Journal, in the pocket of the billionaire class, of the oil and gas industry, of the coal industry. So from the journal, Nature, volatility. Hydroclimate volatility refers to sudden, large, and or frequent transitions between very dry and very wet conditions. It's not a rainy season followed by a dry year. It's really, really significant, quick transitions between very dry and very wet conditions. And what you're seeing on this planet is greater and greater numbers of incidents where this exact dynamic is observed. The number of whiplash events has increased by 1/3 to 2/3 subseasonal, right? Average subseasonal and then interannual every year. So within seasons, you're seeing 1/3 to 2/3 more of these events. And then for interannual, in between years, you're seeing it a little bit less frequently. But still more frequently than in the past. It's what's predicted by the theory of climate change, and it's what's observed given the reality of climate change. So the Wall Street Journal is just simply all wet. And don't believe me, believe the Eyewitness News 7. According to that corporate media, right? ABC, Disney, LA experienced two extraordinarily wet, not just kind of wet, extraordinarily wet, and virtually no rain since May 6th last year. Just about no rain whatsoever. Remember, rainy season usually started, October, November? I remember when I was in Monterey, that was about when you would expect you'd get some rains. Was it, if not in October, November? Nothing. So, and in fact, the dry season started early last year. Even though January was remarkably rainy, remember all the floods in San Diego? You couldn't believe. I mean, San Diego was large parts of it were underwater. It was incredible, the damage there. At the New Year's, 2003 into 2004. And then by February, no more rain. Just, that's it. Wall Street, that's not normal. That's not common. Those are rare, very, very rare events. But they're happening now. They're happening more often. They're predictable, given human burning of, ever more burning of fossil fuels. Something that the Biden-Harris administration has not taken the steps to stop. In fact, has pursued policies that have increased our consumption, production, fossil fuels. Why do people, when it doesn't take a lot of effort to realize what a load of crap the Wall Street Journal is handing you, why do people believe the conspiracy, for example, that climate crisis is a hoax, which is a conspiracy that elites are pushing, right? That whether it's Fox News, which is, Rupert Murdoch, whether it's Wall Street Journal, which is Rupert Murdoch, whether it's a variety of right-wing, wannabe, big shot propagandists, talk radio, YouTubers. Why are people prone to believe that crap and not their own lying eyes that can see, yes, the glaciers have all melted. Yes, we see that San Diego was underwater and now it's completely dry. Yes, we can actually see the fires. Yes, we know how hot it is. We didn't used to need air conditioning. Now we do. Yes, there's flooding. The Mediterranean is flooding more now than ever. So people are experiencing the specific impact of the human-caused climate holocaust. And yet they're not believing it. Why do they believe these conspiracies that are presented by those who profit from burning fossil fuels? Well, I've talked about this before, but I just wanted to give you this quick, share this quick little screenshot here from DOI.org. I think I got this I think this was actually reprinted, or there was a link to it in the, National Institute of Health. Why do people believe conspiracy theories? A major reason: higher levels of economic inequality. People believe this because they are because our institutions are failing them. You have no place to go if you can't afford health care. You have no place to go if you're threatened with eviction. Your newspapers and magazines have lied to you about many things. They're not lying to you about the climate crisis. They're covering it. But they've lied to you about many other issues. And because of that, virtually every newspaper in America endorsed Hillary over Bernie. in the Democratic primaries. They were lying to you. They were to tell you that she had plans to solve our problems was a falsity. She's created problems. She's exacerbated problems. Our media lies to us. So when they do tell the truth, we're not likely to believe them. The only we have got to come up with, we've got to embrace an alternative to the corporate-controlled media, for sure. That's what this program attempts to do, and to the corporate-controlled major political party, two parties that control our politics. That's the way we can accomplish peace. That's the way we can finally move into a society that does, in fact, embrace the best of America, the best ideals. We're so far from there right now. All right, I'll be back tomorrow. You have a great afternoon, and fingers crossed, please, for peace in Gaza.